Welcome. Today we'll embark on a deep dive into a pivotal week in history, September 25th to October 1st, 1939. Just 3 weeks after Germany's invasion of Poland this week witnessed the brutal fall of Warsaw, the solidifying of the Nazi-Soviet pact, and the ripples of war spreading across Europe.
We begin our examination on Monday, September 25th, 1939. On this day, the Luftwaffe launched a massive air raid on Warsaw involving approximately 400 bombers.
This operation was directly observed by Hitler himself, who watched from a nearby bunker. The goal of the Luftwaffe's relentless bombing was to crush the spirit of the city and its defenders.
On the same day, Hitler issued Directive No. 4 titled Finishing the War in Poland. This directive underscored the Nazi leadership's commitment to a swift and decisive victory in Poland, showcasing the ruthless efficiency of the German war machine.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the English Channel, the British Royal Navy began laying anti-submarine mines in the Strait of Dover, a critical step in protecting vital shipping lanes in the Atlantic from German U-boats.
Even on the first day of this week, the war was expanding on multiple fronts. As Monday drew to a close, a major tank battle concluded in Poland at Tomaszow-Lubelski.
Tuesday's September 26th saw this engagement end in a decisive German victory, further consolidated their control over southeastern Poland. In Warsaw, the siege continued dragging on into its 19th day.
The Polish resistance within the besieged capital remained strong, but the situation was growing increasingly desperate. In Berlin, a state funeral was held for General Loberst Werner von Frisch, who was killed in action in Warsaw. Hitler, however, did not attend the funeral despite sending a large wreath.
On that same Tuesday, a British plane shot down a German aircraft over the North Sea. This marked a significant escalation in the air war, as it was the first time British forces had downed a German plane during the conflict.
In France, the government responded to the alarming events in Poland by banning the French Communist Party. This decision was a direct reaction to the Soviet Union's invasion of Poland and its unsettling alliance with Nazi Germany.
Wednesday, September 27th, proved to be a pivotal day. After 19 days of relentless bombardment, the city of Warsaw finally fell.
The Polish defenders, facing overwhelming odds and dwindling supplies, were forced to surrender. The fall of Warsaw was a devastating blow to Poland, marking the loss of its capital and a significant symbolic defeat.
On the same day, one of the last cavalry battles of the war took place near Sambor at a place called WWII.
Here, Polish forces engaged in a desperate clash with the advancing Soviet troops. Despite their valiant efforts, the Polish cavalry was overwhelmed and defeated, further emphasizing the two-front nightmare Poland was facing.
Even as Warsaw fell and the military situation deteriorated, the seeds of resistance were being sown. General Miłosz Karasiewicz-Tukhachevsky formed the Service for Poland's Victory, the first organized resistance movement of the war.
This underground organization signaled the beginning of a long and arduous struggle for Polish freedom. Back in Berlin, the Nazi regime took steps to further consolidate its power, establishing the Reich Security Main Office, or RSHA.
This new agency, headed by Heinrich Himmler, brought together the Gestapo and the SD, effectively centralizing the instruments of Nazi terror and persecution.
In Britain, the realities of war began to hit home as the Chancellor introduced a wartime budget, including significant tax increases to fund the escalating conflict. The financial burden of war was starting to be felt by the British public.
In France, the government continued to react to the perceived threat from the Soviet Union. They decided to ban all communist organizations, reflecting the growing concern over Soviet influence in Europe.
As Wednesday, September 27th, drew to a close, the situation in Poland appeared grim. However, the spirit of resistance was flickering, and the broader European powers were grappling with the implications of the expanding conflict.
Thursday, September 28th, was a day of significant events that would shape the course of the war. The Siege of Warsaw officially ended after 20 days of intense fighting.
The city, now under German control, lay in ruins, a stark testament to the destructive nature of modern warfare. Meanwhile, near the town of Sac, Polish forces engaged Soviet troops in a fierce battle, utilizing anti-tank weapons effectively and inflicting heavy casualties.
Despite their tactical success at Sac, the Poles were ultimately forced to withdraw in the face of overwhelming Soviet reinforcements. However, the most momentous event of that day did not occur on the battlefields, but rather far from the front lines.
In Moscow, representatives from Germany and the Soviet Union met and signed the German-Soviet Boundary and Friendship Treaty. This treaty formally divided Poland between the two powers.
The pact was a turning point in the early stages of World War II, redrawing the map of Eastern Europe.
The agreement also revised the secret protocols of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, assigning Lithuania to the Soviet sphere of influence. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union continued to exert pressure on the Baltic states.
Estonia, facing the intimidating power of the Soviet Union, was compelled to sign a mutual assistance pact.
This pact granted permission for Soviet military bases to be established on Estonian soil. This agreement marked a significant erosion of Estonian sovereignty and paved the way for their eventual annexation into the Soviet Union. Romania, caught precariously between the expanding German and Soviet spheres of influence, attempted to chart a neutral course by forming a new government. However, navigating this increasingly treacherous geopolitical landscape would prove exceptionally challenging.
That concludes Thursday, September 28th, a pivotal day during this fateful week in 1939. We will now move on to Friday, September 29th.
Friday, September 29th began with the surrender of the Modlin Fortress, a key Polish stronghold north of Warsaw, to the Germans. This surrender followed a prolonged siege, further weakening the Polish defense.
In the Lublin region, Polish troops continued to fight against the Soviets, but despite inflicting heavy casualties, they were ultimately forced to retreat against the superior Soviet forces.
The situation for Poland continued to worsen as they faced relentless attacks from both the east and west. Meanwhile, on the diplomatic front, Estonia finalized its agreement with the Soviet Union, formally allowing the establishment of Soviet naval and air bases on its territory.
This move effectively ended Estonian independence and brought the country firmly under Soviet control. The events of Friday, September 29th further underscored the rapid shifts in power dynamics in Eastern Europe as the Soviet Union consolidated its gains while Polish resistance continued to crumble. We will now continue our chronological examination of this week by looking at the events of Saturday, September 30th.
On Saturday, September 30th, the battles in the Lublin region concluded. Despite inflicting heavy losses on the Red Army, Polish forces were ultimately driven back, marking the end of large-scale organized Polish resistance in the east.
However, on that same day, a glimmer of hope emerged as the Polish government-in-exile was established in Paris.
This government, led by Władysław Rackiewicz as president and General Władysław Sikorski as prime minister, vowed to continue the fight for Polish freedom.
Their establishment signaled that despite the military defeats, the Polish spirit of resistance remained unbroken. In Berlin, Hitler issued Directive No. 5, Partition of Poland.
This directive outlined the administration of occupied Poland by Germany, detailing plans for integrating certain Polish territories into the Reich and establishing German civil administration in other areas.
The directive essentially formalized the dismantling of Polish sovereignty and the imposition of German control over the occupied territories. The Soviet Union also moved swiftly to consolidate its control over eastern Poland.
Soviet officials began implementing policies aimed at integrating these regions into the Soviet system. This included the arrest of Polish military officers and local leaders.
The events of Saturday, September 30th solidified the division of Poland and marked the beginning of a long and difficult period of occupation for the Polish people. Our deep dive now moves on to the final day of this week, Sunday, October 1st.
Sunday, October 1st, saw the Battle of Partition conclude in a Soviet victory, further diminishing Polish resistance in the east. After a long and valiant defense, the Polish garrison at the Hel Peninsula surrendered to German forces.
This marked the end of one of the last pockets of organized Polish military resistance. As the fighting in Poland subsided, attention shifted to preparations for a wider war. In Britain, all men aged 20 to 22 were ordered to register for military service, signaling the country's commitment to a long-term conflict.
Winston Churchill, in a now famous radio address, described Russia as a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma, highlighting the uncertainties surrounding Soviet intentions. His words reflected the complex and unpredictable nature of the war that had just begun.
As this fateful week drew to a close, the map of Europe had been redrawn. Poland lay divided under occupation, and the world braced itself for a global conflict.
The events of this week set in motion a chain of events that would have profound and lasting consequences for the course of the 20th century. This week in 1939 witnessed not only the military conquest of Poland, but also the beginning of a new world order.
An order dominated by two totalitarian regimes, bound by an unsettling alliance.
The Nazi-Soviet pact, signed just days after the fall of Warsaw, sent shockwaves throughout the world.
The pact revealed the true nature of these regimes and their willingness to carve up Europe for their own gain.
This week also highlighted the vulnerability of smaller nations caught between these powerful forces.
Estonia's forced acceptance of Soviet bases was a clear demonstration of this vulnerability.
It foreshadowed the fate of other Baltic states soon to be absorbed into the Soviet Union.
What about the response of the Western democracies during this critical week?
Britain and France, while officially at war with Germany, were largely inactive on the military front.
Their focus was on rearming and preparing for a long conflict.
However, their actions such as Britain's wartime budget and the banning of communist parties in France revealed their anxieties and determination.
They recognized the gravity of the situation and the threat posed by both Germany and the Soviet Union.
The week of September 25th to October 1st, 1939, serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the devastating consequences of unchecked aggression.
It also underscores the importance of understanding history, so we can learn from its lessons and strive to prevent such tragedies from happening again.
Let's delve deeper into some of the specific events of this week, examining their immediate impact and long-term significance.
We can start with the fall of Warsaw on September 27th.
The capture of the Polish capital was a major military victory for Germany.
It demonstrated the effectiveness of their blitzkrieg tactics, combining rapid armored advances with overwhelming air power.
The fall of Warsaw also had a profound psychological impact on the Polish people.
It shattered their hopes for a quick victory and marked the beginning of a brutal occupation.
The siege and subsequent occupation of Warsaw resulted in widespread destruction and suffering.
Thousands of civilians were killed or injured in the bombings.
Many more faced hardship and persecution under the Nazi regime.
The capture of Warsaw also had strategic implications for the war.
It gave Germany control of a major industrial and transportation hub in Eastern Europe.
This control facilitated their further advance eastward and consolidated their grip on Poland.
The fall of Warsaw serves as a tragic reminder of the human cost of war and the devastating impact of totalitarian regimes.
Now let's shift our focus to the Nazi-Soviet pact and its consequences.
The signing of the German-Soviet Boundary and Friendship Treaty on September 28th was a pivotal event.
It formalized the division of Poland between Germany and the Soviet Union.
This pact shocked the world as it brought together two ideologically opposed regimes in a cynical alliance.
The pact also exposed the true nature of Soviet foreign policy, revealing their willingness to collaborate with Nazi Germany for territorial gain.
The division of Poland had devastating consequences for the Polish people.
It led to the displacement of millions and subjected them to the brutality of two totalitarian regimes.
The Nazi-Soviet pact also had significant implications for the broader European balance of power.
It effectively removed Poland as a buffer state between Germany and the Soviet Union.
This removal paved the way for future Soviet expansion into Eastern Europe.
The pact also freed up German forces to focus on the Western Front, setting the stage for the invasion of France and the Low Countries in the following year.
The Nazi-Soviet pact stands as a chilling example of realpolitik and the cynical calculations that can drive international relations.
Let's now examine the situation in the Baltic states during this pivotal week.
Estonia, under immense pressure from the Soviet Union, signed a mutual assistance pact on September 28th.
This pact allowed the establishment of Soviet military bases on Estonian territory.
This agreement marked a significant loss of Estonian sovereignty and paved the way for their eventual annexation into the Soviet Union.
The situation in Estonia mirrored the broader Soviet strategy in the region.
They sought to regain control of the territories lost after the Russian Revolution.
They used a combination of military pressure, political maneuvering, and intimidation to achieve their goals.
The fate of Estonia serves as a cautionary tale of how smaller nations can become victims of larger, more aggressive powers.
It also highlights the dangers of appeasement and the importance of collective security in defending against totalitarian aggression.
Now turning our attention to Britain and France during this fateful week.
Despite being officially at war with Germany, their military actions were limited.
Their focus was on building up their forces and preparing for a long and difficult conflict.
However, they did take steps to address the economic and political challenges posed by the war.
Britain introduced a wartime budget with increased taxes to fund the war effort.
This measure reflected the growing recognition that the war would require significant sacrifices from the British public.
France, deeply concerned by the Soviet Union's actions in Poland, took a decisive step by banning all communist organizations.
This action reflected the growing tensions between the Western democracies and the Soviet Union.
It also underscored the ideological divide that would shape the post-war world.
The actions of Britain and France during this week revealed their determination to confront the threat posed by Nazi Germany.
However, they also highlighted their initial reluctance to engage in a full-scale military conflict.
Their cautious approach would have significant consequences for the course of the war in the months to come.
Let's now explore the impact of this fateful week on the lives of ordinary people across Europe.
The outbreak of war brought uncertainty, fear, and disruption to millions.
In Poland, civilians faced the horrors of bombardment, occupation, and displacement.
Families were torn apart, homes were destroyed, and lives were irrevocably altered.
In Britain and France, people prepared for the possibility of air raids and rationing.
The shadow of war loomed over everyday life as This Week in 1939 came to a close. We've been examining This Week in 1939, a week that began with the fall of Warsaw
And ended with the sobering realization that a much larger conflict had begun.
The events of this week set in motion forces that would reshape the world. Let's step back now and consider some of the broader themes and lessons.
The speed at which events unfolded is striking. From the invasion of Poland on September 1st to the fall of Warsaw. Just weeks later, the pace of aggression was relentless.
It highlights the danger of complacency and the need for decisive action in the face of threats.
The Nazi-Soviet pact is another stark example of how quickly alliances can shift. It was a pact born out of expediency, not shared values.
And it demonstrates the danger of underestimating the ambitions of totalitarian regimes.
The fate of Poland during this week is also a tragic reminder of the human cost of war. A nation caught between two aggressive powers, its people suffered immensely.
The destruction of Warsaw, the loss of life, and the beginning of a long and brutal occupation are a testament to the horrors of war.
We also see the seeds of resistance being sown during this week. The formation of the Polish government-in-exile and the emergence of underground resistance movements demonstrate the enduring spirit of a people determined to fight for their freedom.
It underscores the fact that even in the darkest of times, hope and the will to resist can endure.
This week in 1939 also offers insights into the challenges of leadership during times of crisis.
The decisions made by leaders in Britain, France, Germany, and the Soviet Union had far-reaching consequences.
Their choices, driven by a complex mix of ideologies, strategic calculations, and domestic pressures, shaped the course of the war and the future of Europe.
The events of this week underscore the importance of strong and principled leadership in defending democracy and resisting tyranny.
As we conclude our deep dive into this pivotal week, it's essential to reflect on the lessons we can learn from history.
Understanding the events that led to World War II can help us recognize and address the warning signs of aggression and intolerance in our own time.
It's a reminder that peace and freedom are fragile and require constant vigilance and a commitment to upholding our values.
The week of September 25th to October 1st, 1939, stands as a sobering testament to the human capacity for both destruction and resilience.
It's a myth that should compel us to learn from the past, to strive for a better future, and to never forget the sacrifices made by those who fought for freedom.
This week serves as a reminder that the choices we make today can have profound and lasting consequences for generations to come.